All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. This is the sixth entry now in WIRSPA's Icon series. We're really excited to have you here today. As always, we have your host, WIRSPA Community Envoy Matt Petrick, and joining him today is a very special guest, Komal Samaroo, Executive Chairman of Demerara Distillers Ltd. And WIRSPA Chairman. Matt's going to give the deep dive introduction in just a moment. But before we get into that, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co. And as always, just want to show you a couple of ways that you can interact throughout the show today. So on your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're joining us from. I know we have folks from all around the world here today, so it's always fun to see who's showing up and where you're at. If you have a question at any point during the show, there's a little button at the bottom of your screen that says Ask a Question. So just click that, enter in your question, and Matt will be keeping an eye out for those throughout the show. And last but not least, if you want to invite your friends to join us, there's a share button at the top that makes it easy to do that. But yeah, with all that out of the way, Matt, I will turn things over to you now.
Thank you, Will. As always, a pleasure to be here. This is, as you mentioned, this is our sixth Icon Series session. For those who are just tuning in for the first time, the reason we're doing this is because WIRSPA, the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association, of whom Komal is the chairman of now, we are celebrating 50 years of helping elevate Caribbean rum and advocating for the independent rum-making countries of the Caribbean. So as part of that, we wanted to go back and talk to some of the people who've had an enormous impact on the rum industry over the past 30, 40, 50 years. And we've had some amazing people on, and we have some amazing people coming up. We just announced yesterday, Joy Spence is going to be joining us next week. But this time around, we're going to be talking with Komal Samaroo, who I first met in May of 2019. I was invited to a WIRSPA meeting, and I met Komal there, and then I've been fortunate to see him a number of other times since then. Komal has had an enormous impact on not only Caribbean rum, but especially the Guyanese rum industry, and he has been effectively worked side by side for many decades with Dr. Yasu Prasad, who we had previously had on as an Icon Series guest. So I couldn't be more thrilled to be talking with Komal today and having him share some of his important contributions to the Caribbean rum industry. So Komal, hello and thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I'm delighted to be here and to share with you and the audience the journey that I've been on for the last 50 plus years.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, as long as I've been alive, you have been working in the rum industry. So cool. Let's jump right in here, like we always do. Tell us about your life before you joined the rum industry. Sort of what led up to what sort of prepared you to do what you've done?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just like any other country boy growing up in Guyana, just on the suburbs of Georgetown. I had the opportunity of going to high school, getting free high school education, just a couple of years after it became free. And I finished high school the year after the country became independent. Country became independent in 1966. And I was out of high school in 1967, looking for a job and to start a career in anything that comes along. But in high school, I was basically a natural science student. Never thought I would have gone in the direction of a business career. I thought I would have gone in the direction of a career in the natural science field. But circumstances, led me in another direction. So for the first year that I was out of high school, I was looking for a job. It took me a year before I finally got a job in an office of a trading company, a family-owned business. And my first job was that of an accounts receivable clerk. And based on how I did my job, my boss suggested at the time that I should pursue a career in accounting. And he got me registered in one of the professional bodies in the UK that would allow me to work and study part time. Uh, I didn't quite take a liking for it, but eventually I ended up moving in that direction.
Cool. So, and before we sort of jump into your rum industry, we already have our first interesting question from Vaughn, who wants to know, where do you buy your shirts?
Well, this shirt was purchased in 1996 when I was a part of the delegation that went to Singapore at the first World Trade Organization ministerial meeting. So this shirt that I'm wearing here is 25 years old.
Oh, wow. Well, I love that shirt. So if I could get one, I would wear that next time for these. So, we've got you up to where you were working as an accountant. How did you fall into the rum industry?
Right. So I was with this family-owned business that was managed by several brothers and sisters. And, you know, in family business, there was a lot of discord among the members. So I realized that that was very short term, and I keep looking for jobs. It so happened that about a year after I was with this company, in fact, exactly 10 months after, I was called to two interviews on the same day, one with an insurance company and the other with Booker's Rum Company. Uh, so I attended those interviews, and then a week after, on the same day, virtually, I got two offers of a job, one to work with an insurance company and the other to work with Booker's Rum Company. Of course, the insurance company was paying a little bit more than the rum company, but I discussed it with my parents, and they thought that given the reputation of Booker's was a transnational company that owned businesses in Guyana. In fact, it was a dominant business in Guyana, owned businesses in Africa and the United Kingdom, and persons who joined that group generally would have a long and very successful career. So my parents advised me that I should go and work with Booker's, that
Right.
it is better than working with the insurance company. And
Right, and I
hence,
think I was going to say, I think if I remember correctly, I mean, Booker's was a really big deal in Guyana. That the country's initials, BG, British Guyana, people would sometimes joke it stood for Booker's Guyana. It had such an influence over the country.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
They were the largest group, and they were the dominant player in the sugar industry, in the trading and manufacturing sector, um, and a significant part of the national economy at that time.
Okay, so you got a job with Booker. So what were you first doing there?
Yeah, well, I got a job in the bottling plant. Booker's Rum Company was basically the bottler of rums for the domestic market. Um, as you know, in those days, based on the laws that existed, the distillation was done by one company, a separate company, which was called Albion Distillers Ltd.
Okay, we know
And
that.
Booker's,
Yeah.
yes, and they owned the distilleries,
Yeah.
but Booker's Rum Company was the sister company that did the bottling and sales and distribution on the domestic market.
Okay.
So my job, I was a clerical assistant in the bottling plant, and my job was to keep the record of the rum that was in the vats, to give an account of when it was bottled, and to give an account of all the inbound inventory, which record had to agree with the customs record. There were customs officers resident in the plant. So I had to keep them informed of all the movement of inventory that was taking place. And actually, the first day I joined the company, I can still remember my first job was to climb on top of every vat that had rum and dip it at 4 different points, find the average, and then go to a calibration book and see how much rum is in that vat and how much compared with what it was there the previous month and what the losses were and whether it was within limits and stuff like that. So that was my job.
Did you get to sample it at any point during this testing?
I had to work very closely with the blenders, I have to tell you. And they initiated me into the world of rum at the age of 19.
Yes. Yeah, we should all be so lucky. So you were started out in a bottling plant, basically, tracking inventory. Uh, but I understand you had a fairly rapid rise after that. Like, where did you go in those first few years after that?
Right. Well, I spent a year there, and then I thought, that this I don't think I have a future here that uh, that I would be happy with, and so I applied for a transfer into the accounting department. Um, and I've decided now, at long last, after that mental adjustment, that I'm going to pursue a career in accounting. And so I was transferred in the accounting department in 1971, January. And there I started, I was given the responsibility of doing the costing of the products that was produced in the bottling plant. And my knowledge in the plant obviously helped me there, so I helped to streamline that process. And I worked and studied, moving up to supervisor and assistant accountant position over the next 3 to 4 years, completing what was then the Institute of Chartered Secretaries exam in 1974. And then I started pursue my chartered accountancy exam immediately after.
Okay. So during those sort of first 5-10 years in the industry, those were right after Guyana's independence in 1966,
Mhm.
and there was certainly a lot of nationalization of the sugar and rum industry over that time. How did from your perspective, how did Guyana's rum industry landscape change in the decade up to around 1976?
Yes. So I think I need to give a sort of context of the
Yes.
industry was then and how it evolved in those years. So essentially, there were two groups. There was the Demerara Company group that owned the two sugar estate and owned a rum company called Diamond Liquors Limited. And there was the Booker's Group that owned, I think, 10 or 11 estates at the time and owned the distillery, the Albion Distilleries and Booker's Rum Company. Now, in 1970, Booker's merged the Albion Distillers and Booker's Rum Company to create a new entity called Guyana Distilleries Ltd. So from 1970, there were two companies that were engaged in the rum business, owned by two groups, each of which had head office in England. Now, Diamond Liquors, no, immediately after independence, I think the companies in the UK start recognizing that there was a process of change that is coming. And so Diamond Liquors became a public company with the public shareholding of about 30%, sometime in the late 1960s. And then in 1970, Booker's floated some of the shares in Guyana distilleries on the stock market. So that became a public company as well, with about 16-17% of the shares being held by the public. So there were two public companies. There was not a stock market, but they were public companies under the Companies Act that were in the distilling business. Now, in 1975, the government announced that it was entering into negotiations to acquire the interests of Demerara companies in these businesses, in the businesses they had in Guyana. And then in 1976, a similar announcement was made in relation to the Booker's Group. Um, and so for me, at that point in time, when I was about the last phase of my professional studies, it was quite a traumatic experience that now the government is going to control this business, and therefore the future became quite uncertain. Um, However, after the negotiations, which led to the government acquiring the majority interest in the company, they took a decision to set up a holding company, a company called the Guyana Liquor Corporation, that held the government's interest in both of these two companies. And Isu Prasad was appointed the the executive chairman of that group. So I met him for the first time at the first management meeting he had, and shortly after my exam results were out, and I had one more part to complete, and he was quite gracious and generous, and he said that the company will send me to the UK to complete my exams.
Okay.
So in early 1977, I went off to the UK to complete my chartered accountancy exam.
Okay. And when did you come back to Guyana after that?
Yes. So I came back in the third quarter of 1977, and I was appointed to the position of group chief accountant. So my first job was to pull all the financials together and do the first set of consolidated financial statements for the group, as it were, at that time.
Okay. So you could say from the mid to late 1970s, you were essentially becoming Yasu's, I guess, right-hand man and in terms of the financial aspect of the company. Is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment of what happened. And in fact, I moved up quite rapidly, because the next year I became the group finance controller and the corporate secretary. And then by 1979, I was the group finance director. So it was quite a sort of meteoric rise over those few years. And of course, my job was to, apart from provide financial assistance, to do the project. We did a lot of project feasibility and a lot of financial engineering to fund the group during that period. It was a public company, and I think that the public interest in the company, in my view, was the sort of guardrail that kept the company on a commercial track and prevented too much of political influences being brought into the management of the company. Right.
So I want to talk about that a little, drill down a little bit more here. So essentially, by the late 1970s, early 1980s, essentially Guyana's liquor industry has been consolidated under government control, and which is obviously not the case today. So tell us, it's a complicated scenario. Like I've read about the complicated scenario, but tell us about how DDL not only became formed out of that, but then also how did it manage to go private again? Sort of like explain that.
Right. Okay. So the first thing was, the first thing we did, or Dr. Prasad pioneered, advocated and got the approval of the government, was that since you were talking about local ownership and local control of the economy, we would like to get all of our employees to be shareholders in the company. And so sometime around 1980, it was agreed that 1 million shares in Diamond Liquors and 1 million shares in Guyana Distilleries would have been made available to its employees. And I worked with an insurance company, strange enough, the same one that interviewed me, on a very creative scheme whereby they funded the acquisition of those shares and took out a life insurance policy, an endowment policy on the life of every employee based on the number of shares, on the value of the shares those employees had purchased. And the dividends on those shares went to them and paid for the interest on the loan, as well as the premium on that endowment policy. So over a 10-year period, those employees, were assumed full ownership of those shares because they were then fully acquired. So that was the first phase of dilution, if you will, of the government's interest. Then, as we went down that road, Guyana was a sort of, in those days, we were experimenting with socialism, right? So it was a closed economy, it was a controlled economy. And in 1986, when the government at that time decided to open up the economy, and and liberalization came in, the exchange rate, which was artificially managed, actually skyrocketed from 4 to 1 to, something like 50 to 1 or so. So the company needed working capital. And we made a case to the government that they either provide us with the additional working capital because of the depreciation of the dollar, or you allow us to raise new capital. And they agreed to raise new capital, which we did in the mid-1980s. And then as we went down that road in 1989, 1990, given the trade liberalization that was taking place around the world and the need for the company to transition some of its bulk business into brand, we made another case to the government to say, if we do not inject new capital into this company, it will not be able to meet the challenges of trade liberalization. And they agreed, and so we went to the market again, and we issued shares. By that time, the government shareholding was down to about 20%.
Okay.
And finally, in 1994, when we then had a new president who would come in a couple of years before, a case was made to him, and he decided that they're going to sell all the government shares to as many people as possible, limiting every person to getting 10,000 shares, and whatever is not sold will go to the pension funds and the national insurance. And so over those various transactions, the government eventually exited the company in somewhere around 1994.
Right. Yeah. So it's sort of an interesting, way it happened is it's a very different scenario than like in some countries where the government just says we own it outright. There they retained, like it was done in the context of the stock market control, and that over time via dilution and more shares being sold and acquired, you somehow basically it ended up being back in private hands. And it sounds like in large part due to the work that you were doing, that you were sort of spearheading these efforts.
Yeah, I think also that while the government saw the sugar industry as strategic to them and therefore wanted to hold on to that, they did not see the rum industry in a similar light.
Right. Well, that was their loss.
And the second thing that happened is that while the sugar industry had a guaranteed market with guaranteed prices, the rum industry had to compete in a market space. Although it had preferential access, it also had to compete for its market share.
Right.
So they saw it as a much more difficult business to keep under government control.
Right. So how did you may have mentioned this and I may have missed it, but how did the GDL and DLL, if I remember, how did those what was the decision to bring them together?
Right. So as I explained, this was a period of Guyana experimented with socialism from the early 70s to the mid 80s. Now, in that time, during that time, there was currency control, there was import control. You had to queue up to the central bank to get foreign currency allocation, to bring in inputs into the operations and so on. And it was very, very difficult. And so, I made a case that because we had two different set of shareholders in two companies, and the board has a fiduciary responsibility to two sets of shareholders, and we were given a limited sum that had to be allocated to purchase inputs for the two businesses, it was very difficult, and it opened itself to accusations of not equitably allocating the limited resources. And so I made the case that the time maybe has come for us to bring the two companies together. And the board decided to hire a chartered accountant to do comparative valuation. And he made a recommendation that in Guyana distilleries, each shareholder having 3 shares should be given an extra one. And that would bring the value of the shares on parity. And based on that, we will then combine the two companies. Guyana Distilleries will absorb Diamond Liquors, and we will change the name. We agreed to change the name to Demerara Distillers, since Demerara was known, was the origin of where the rum was produced. So that took place in 1983 at the shareholders meeting of the two companies.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned that by 1992 or so, that the government has sort of finally exited the primary ownership picture. It was also a very big year for the relatively new Demerara Distillers, with the launch of their first premium rum. The 15-year El Dorado was maybe, some people say it was really the first high-end premium Caribbean rum, made entirely and aged, bottled in the Caribbean. So what was the thinking of doing that? It was sort of a bold move at the time. What was your thinking of doing that, and what was your part in that?
Right. So one of the things that I will always be grateful for was that Dr. Prasad asked me to represent the company, and at some time when he was chairman of the Private Sector Commission, to represent the private sector at various forums with the government and CARICOM, at which trade was being discussed. So I attended some of the preparatory meeting for the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, which were taking place at that time. And as I attended those meetings, and listened to where this was going, I realized that this is going to have tremendous impact on our business, as we did. That the bulk rum margins would have been under pressure, the preferences would have been under threat, and therefore the time has come for us to take a look at this, at the business model. And so we hired in late 1980s, I think it was 1988, a former marketing director of United Rum Merchants as a consultant to come and work with us and help us to take our, develop a plan to take our domestic brand and develop it to a level that it can be marketed internationally. And he introduced us to a package designer from the UK, who we contracted, and we worked with him to develop a package for the product. Now, in sort of formulating the product, we held an internal competition amongst our chemists and blenders at the time, and I was reminded of this only last Christmas at a Zoom meeting I had with DDL alumni, where a young lady reminded me that she was the one who formulated the El Dorado 15-year-old and got a prize of $300 for winning the competition to formulating the best blend. So a lot of work went on. Prior to 1992, we were working for at least 5 years before the launch of that product on the creation of a branded strategy and package presentation and positioning in the market.
Right.
Because at the time, when we did all the calculations, if we were to get into the standard or even the premium segment of the market, we would not have been able to generate margins that would be required for the marketing of the product. And so when we look at the spirit category as well, and we saw what whiskey was doing, single malt whiskeys and so on, we thought that maybe the time has come, and the product was so good that we should really position this way up there. So when we came out with the 15-year-old, we were targeting a retail price of $20 per bottle. And everybody thought that was much, much too high, because I can buy a bottle of rum for $5, you know?
Yeah. That was a fairly unusual bottle shape at the time. Was it like a story around that?
Yeah, well, when the gentleman came to Georgetown, he and his assistant, and spent a week and walked around, as he was walking in Georgetown, he saw an antique bottle vendor sitting in Main Street selling these bottles that they recover from various places. And so he became quite interested. You know, some of those bottles goes back to the days of the Dutch, when the Dutch was exporting Geneva to Guyana and so on, when they had owned the country. And so his inspiration came from some of the antique bottles that he saw being sold by vendors to collectors of antique bottles.
Okay. And So you said you worked on it for about 5 years. So say from 1987 to 1992, you were creating this, um, which is a long time. And again, if you think back to what the rum market was, like what a premium rum meant back in 1988 or 1990, this was a pretty substantial leap forward into today. What is now one of the I know Lance has called it like one of the key rums of the world, for example. But it took a little while for it to take off. But I mean, eventually, didn't it? It sort of it started winning some awards. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, if I may comment first on the reason why it took so long. I mean, the first product that we came up with, and we did test marketing, it was something called El Dorado, the Golden One. And the test market on that did not come out well. That went on for a couple of years. And
Right.
we realized that we did a lot of groundwork, research and development work to really get to that point of finding something that we think was ahead of the curve. Now, when we started at that time, really we couldn't find importers who were interested in the product. You see, so what we did, we actually established little companies. We had Demerara Rum Company in the UK with one person working there, basically pounding the pavement and calling on stores and bars.
Was that in Liverpool, by the way?
That was in Liverpool.
The main rum. Now they're the main rum offices.
Absolutely. We eventually, when we exited, that office was handed over to Main Rum Company.
Okay.
Exactly the same office.
Okay.
And then in Amsterdam, the company that was doing our bulk rum business, was being sold. So we bought the subsidiary that handled our business, and we got them to focus on both bulk and brand. And then in the US, which was a very complicated market, we couldn't find an importer. And somebody, gentleman from Italy, asked me one day, talking about the difficulty at some place, and he said, "Why don't you set up your own import company?" And then the light bulb came. And so we established Demerara Distillers USA Ltd, and we applied to the authorities for it to be a licensed importer, and hence we became our own importer in the United States. So it was really a very, very difficult journey. Even after we got access into the market, to find wholesalers to carry the brand.
Right.
As you know, there's a 3-tier structure in the United States. It was a major challenge.
Right. Now there was, go ahead.
Yeah. And so the first half of the 1990s, that was the struggle. And then in the mid-90s, 95, 96, for a couple of consecutive years, we entered it into the International Wine and Spirits Competition in London. And it was adjudged best rum. And so, I mean, it started to get some attention, and we started to use those awards as a message to support a brand and get people more interested in tasting and recognizing that rum is as good a drink as any other.
Yeah. And I do think that win was sort of a major inflection point for the brand. Would you agree?
Yeah, yes, but it was a slow process.
Mm-hmm.
We were making progress. We by then we had completed the portfolio with the 12 and the 5, and so we had a portfolio, and we were making steady but slow progress. And so in 2000 and 2004, I agreed with the board that I will dedicate my time to the international market to really give the brand a push. So I was given the additional designation of Vice President International Marketing, and I relocated in Toronto in 2004.
Where you are now.
Where I am right now, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And to actually present in the market, to feel it, to understand it, to build relationship, to build contacts. And so for the next 10 years, from 2004 to 2013, I was based in Toronto. I made some very good friends. I met some really great people. I can recall as I was sitting at home planning how I'm going to take on this mammoth job that I've volunteered to do. A good friend of mine called me. A gentleman called me. I didn't know him, to say that somebody told me about this El Dorado rum, and how can where can they get it and stuff like that. And he was obviously in the wine and spirit business, and so I engaged him, and we became friends. And we're friends up to this day. I suspect he might even be logged in onto this. Bob, if you're there, good to have you. And he introduced me to new agents in Ontario and Quebec. And so I engaged new agents and get them on board. Of course, again, it was an education process, because nobody believed that rum had a place in the market amongst the best whiskeys and cognacs and other.
Right.
So, and I recalled one story that will summarize everything. I remember I finally, somewhere the end of 2004, early 2005, I finally got a meeting with the buyer on the LCBO. I was making a pitch to get El Dorado 12-year-old rum in what was called the regular list. There are different listings that you get. You get a regular list, which means it orders all the time, or you get a specialty list, which they only order once a year. So the 12-year-old was in that specialty, and I went to have a meeting to try and get the 12-year-old in the regular list. And he said to me, no rum beyond $30 is going to go in the regular list. We were retailing at the time at $37 a bottle. And so we ended up in a sort of an argument about it. And I think that the passion that I brought to the process convinced him to give us a chance. And he said, okay, I'll put it on a trial. I'll give you a chance. And so we got 12-year-old on the regular list on a trial basis. And I hired promoters, and I had somebody managing a group of promoters. And as it came in, we were promoting it, and it moved off the shelf. So as a result of the rate of depletion, the LCBO created, for the first time, a deluxe amber category in their rum portfolio. And El Dorado has always been, I think up to this day, the leading brand in that category.
Right. And, on the subject of Canada, I know that a lot of WIRSPA's efforts, even from its very first days, have been on gaining access to the Canadian market for Caribbean rum brands. Would you say Canada is a challenge just to get into, just because of all the different provinces?
No, I would think that the thing is that the liquor boards operate on the basis of quotas. If your sales do not meet a certain level, you are delisted. You see, each province control, except Alberta.
Right.
The provinces control the retailing of alcohol and wines, spirits and wines, and they want fast depletion, and so there's a minimum. They set a minimum value that if a brand does not achieve that, it will not get into the regular list, because of the number of brands that are fighting to get on the shelf and the limited shelf space that is available.
Right. And I know that even today, the Canadian rum enthusiasts out there are constantly clamoring to get more brands in there. It's still a challenge today. So, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Okay. So one last history question before we sort of move on to the WIRSPA topics. I know this is a question of interest to a lot of the Demerara rum geeks out there. By the 1990s, Demerara Distillers is down to 3 remaining distilleries, which are Enmore, Iflot, and I hope I pronounced that recently close, and Diamond. There were three distilleries, and by the end, by basically 2000, you're down to 1. It's like, what sort of happened in that era? What was the reasons and happenings that led from 3 operating distilleries down to just
Yes.
Diamond today?
Yeah, well, first of all, Enmore was relocated to Iflut in 1994, but it happened after there was a fire at Enmore Distillery. And I remember this well. One Saturday morning, the rum store went up in fire, and I remember racing down to the plant while the fire was taking place. But after that fire in early 1994, we took a decision to relocate the distillation fermentation process at Iflut. And so that was the first merger that took place. We exited the Enmore location and at Iflut. Then we had two substantial operations, one at Diamond and one at Iflut. And of course, these were changing times that was taking place. These were times where competitive pressure was on, and at the same time, the question of environmental issues and stuff like that. So we were in discussions with the trade union actually, and we are trying to squeeze margins out of our operation to reinvest into these 2 operations to bring them up to the level that would meet the circumstances of the day. And in that negotiation, there was a gap between what the union wanted for its employees and what the company felt it could afford. And so in that negotiations, we had really excellent relations with the union. I advanced the thought and I said, if we give what you want, then it will be very short term. I don't think this business will be sustainable. But if we want a sustainable company, then the only way forward is for you to agree that we merge these plants, and there will be some, redundancy as a result of that. That's the only basis, and they agreed to that proposal. And then a couple of days after, they accompanied me to go and announce to the staff at Iflut that the company will be merging this operation, and we will deal with them as fairly as we can, and we'll absorb as many as we can, and we'll transfer to other parts of the group, And so the decision was taken in 2000, actually, 2000, to relocate the Iflut operations at Diamond. And so we put all future investment in one location and bring the operation up to a globally acceptable standard.
Right. And I've had the good fortune of visiting Iflut, and of course today there is an amazing aging warehouses there. It was fabulous to walk around them and to taste rum with Sean Caleb, but I was like, I wanted to see the distillery, and Sean pointed it to me, and like, this is just a lot of like twisted metal on the ground. Like, where wasn't there a building here? Like how what happened to the distillery building?
Yeah, well, for me, because when Guyana Distillery was created, and I was in the finance department, and I was responsible for costings and for budgeting. For me, Iflut was very near and dear to me, because I would go to Iflut for the purpose of budget preparation, and I will stay in the guest flat of the manager's house. So I would live there for 3-4 days, and doing all the detailed budget and planning and stuff like that. And on my visits, the distillers would take great pleasure in mixing different types of rum and have me sample it, and sometimes my head at the end of the day would do this. And so for me, growing up in this industry in my early 20s, it was the place that I enjoyed going to, right? And the decision to sort of close it was a very difficult one, but it was a pragmatic decision that had to be made in the long-term interest of the business.
Right. And then, but the fact is there's no building there. You had to you move those stills out rather quickly, didn't you?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, we have a construction team that are really good at relocating, removing these things, lots of old equipment sometimes, and put them back together the way. and the focus was on getting it operational and not to remove the debris that remained behind.
Right.
Hence, you would have seen some of that when you visited.
Right. Yeah, no, it's just like, it was sort of like, I think you mentioned earlier that it was like, if we need to cut down the malt and get the stills out, that's what we'll do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So, this is a WIRSPA session, so let's talk about WIRSPA, of again, which you are the chairman now. So, take us back through your initial WIRSPA experiences, where I think they went back to the 1980s.
Yeah, well, I attended the first WIRSPA meeting actually in Jamaica in 1980. Dr. Bassard at the time was away on leave. I was just made finance director, and I was acting as chairman while he was away on leave. And I've never been to a WIRSPA meeting before. And there was this WIRSPA meeting in Jamaica, I think in January or February of 1980. And so I had to go to the first meeting. And I turned up to the meeting. Really very, very informative. Everything was new to me. I was learning, very steep learning curve, all day meetings. And then in the evening, there was this, this is the incident that I always remember about that meeting. There was a dinner at the Blue Mountain Inn restaurant. And so I asked someone, how do I get to go? And they said, oh, jacket and tie. And then I realized that I didn't have a jacket and tie because, again, I had a shirt jack suit. And so I decided, I said, I'm really not feeling well tonight, and I'm not going to go to dinner. And a gentleman by the name of Bill Ives, he got wind of it. He was Jamaican. I think he worked with Seagram's. He called me in my room and said, Komal, come down with whatever you have. You're going to go with us that same way. So at dinner, I was the odd man out in a shirt jack, a very Castroite shirt jack suit, sitting with everybody with a jacket and a dinner jacket and tie. That's what I remember about my first WIRSPA meeting. That famous dinner at Blue Mountain in Jamaica.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar experience. My first sort of attending a WIRSPA event, I did not dress well. I did not bring good enough clothes for this. So luckily, that didn't stop at anything. So yes, but nominally the head of each country's WIRSPA delegation is, of course, the head of the company, which from the 1980s, 1990s, that would have been Dr. Bassard. Although he was, the main Guyana WIRSPA, or the WIRSPA representative for Guyana until he retired in 2014, I assume you got handed lots of WIRSPA-related work to do on his behalf. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, well, I attended the meeting with him, and my other colleagues would from time to time also. But as chairman of WIRSPA at the time, I mean, the negotiations and stuff like that, he would focus on those things while we focus on the DDL business. We were aware of all the issues that were being addressed at WIRSPA because as a company, those issues affect us, and we needed to factor that in our plans and our strategy. But pretty much, WIRSPA had an executive management committee, and Dr. Bassard, fellows like Patrick Myers, Evan Brown, Tommy Gatliff from Trinidad, and so on. Those were the experienced guys who were in constant touch with each other and dealing with issues. Of course, in those early days, a lot had to do with the negotiation of the Lomé Convention and the renewal of the convention, and the Caribbean agreement with Canada, and the CBI arrangement with the United States. So there was a lot of international trade issues to deal with to protect the preferences that Caribbean rums were offered or benefiting from at the time in those respective markets.
And when the rum sector program came along in 2003 or so, I assume you, as a financial person, I assume you had dealt with a lot of that?
Yes. Well, again, that was as a result of the removal of the preferential access, and this was a way of compensating, the regional rum producers to help them to be in a competitive position and to compete in a marketplace that no longer give them preferences. So yes, we did a lot of internal strategizing, that what are the things we need and what are the help we need. That and so through Dr. Prasad as our representative would advance to the stage of negotiation within WIRSPA first and foremost, and then to the CARICOM negotiating delegation, right? Who were it was a government to government agreement, so they were interacting with the Europeans um, to advance the proposition that was developed nationally. Um, Hence, the rum program, which was agreed, and the funding that was agreed, came out of a desire to recapitalize the rum industry in the Caribbean.
Right, and as I recall, like they didn't just the European Union didn't just give the money away. There were that each individual producer had to come up with projects, individual projects and co-funding and proposals and things like that. I imagine you were heavily involved with those proposals.
Absolutely, yes. So there was a capital component. There was also the environmental component. How do we get our operation up to a standard of environmental, acceptability to the world? And of course, because based on our brand experience and challenges we had with getting our brands established on the market, there was an amount allocated for the development of the Caribbean, the authentic Caribbean brand, to help us to gain access for our brands in the global market. And a lot of those discussion and concepts were generated at a company level and advanced throughout the WIRSPA organization and then to the negotiating team with the Europeans.
Right. So you finally, after Dr. Prasad retired in 2014, you became Guyana. Not only did you become head of Demerara Distillers, but you also became the country's WIRSPA representative.
Yes.
And then just 3 years later, you're elected WIRSPA Chairman in 2017.
Yes.
What was that experience like for you?
Yes. Well, I mean, I thought I was ill prepared for the job, but Frank wanted to step down, and he had been there for quite some time.
10 years. Yeah.
10 years, yes. He's been there 10 years. So, and see the transition and the authentic Caribbean rum program and stuff like that. But so, I mean, initially I thought that really I don't think I was prepared for this job. But then eventually I decided that, yes, I'm going to take it and give it a good try. So the day I was elected, Frank and I met afterwards, and for him to do his little handover talk. And he said, he's very fine, one of the finest gentlemen you can come across. And he said to me, listen, the chairman of WIRSPA's main job is to do all the advocacy work and the negotiation work for the organization. The secretariat, the CEO staff will run the secretariat and stuff like that. And that worried me a little bit afterwards. I mean, after our drink and our handover talk, I mulled on that quite a bit and realized that it would have been very difficult for me to do that because I had a job to do that was quite demanding. And as I think about it also, I thought that maybe the time has come for the secretariat to be able to do all the negotiations and maintain all the relationship, and that the role of the board under my chairmanship should be different. We should provide policy guidance and strategic direction to the CEO and the staff, and they should really run the business. So I made a very significant change from the past, and the role of the chairman, redefined the role of the chairman and empowered the secretariat. And, we have good people there, Vaughn and Caroline, and they were doing a great job, very competent people. And I thought that they would be able to carry that job. Besides that, I think given the constituent, the membership of WIRSPA, I think it is important for neutral persons to be engaged in the day-to-day management of WIRSPA, and give the members who happen to hold office positions as chairman and so on, the opportunity to just provide strategic guidance and overlook. So I think that was a major change that we made, and I discussed it with Vaughn, and who readily agreed that he will take it on. He and I made one trip to Europe, I think. We visited the EU in London, and we had discussion. So everybody knew that from now on, it's no longer the chairman, but it's the CEO who will be the point person on WIRSPA matters. And
Right.
I think that arrangement has worked well in the last few years.
Yeah, and I do think it sort of signals a significant shift, just because by having a sort of a neutral person or the secretariat dedicated to looking out for the day-to-day things and make that their full-time job, as opposed to if you were, in the past, it was like, running the, doing those sort of WIRSPA advocacy was the job of somebody else who was like yourself or Yasu, who is already very busy with other things. So I think it was a substantial step forward.
Yes, I think so, and I think it has laid the groundwork for the way forward in the future. I think, and as we celebrate 50 years this year, I think I will say that WIRSPA has matured as a trade organization, and I would think in the region, probably would probably be the leading trade organization, in the region.
Right. So, I know one of the sort of more recent WIRSPA initiatives has come out, and it's not something that the rum enthusiasts talk about, but I think it is very important for Caribbean rum in general, is the Responsible Drinking Initiative. Can you fill us in a little bit about that?
Yes. So this is a really major issue that is on the agenda, and it's dominating the discussion at various levels. And when we look at what has happened to the cigarette industry and the way that has gone, I think the rum industry needs to be responsible in the way it markets its product, and we have a code of conduct that we ask members to adhere to, and that we recognize that the irresponsible use of alcohol can be injurious to people's health, and we in our marketing we must be very responsible in the sort of message that we carry there. As a company, we have a policy that we do not advertise on television, not even late in the night. We do not advertise on television, period. And we have adopted that policy a long time ago. We have tried to work with our retailers so that in the countryside, where rules are there but not followed, sometimes parents send kids to the liquor store to buy liquor and stuff like that. We have tried to partner with our retailers to say, this is something you must not do. It's against the law, And so we try to adhere to a code of conduct and try to get our business partners in the industry to be part of that. So this is a really major agenda. It's before WHO at the present time, and as they talk about non-communicable diseases, while there's issues of salt and trans fat and so on, somehow alcohol seems to be the main thing that is focused on, and that is because of the high profile, that branded alcohol has gotten in the scheme of things.
Right, and I think it's a great example of the behind the scenes work that an organization like WIRSPA does. That's not necessarily visible on the consumer side or even to the enthusiast side. Between that and things like the Lomé Convention and getting the Caribbean rum sector program, those are major things the organization has done that the consumer doesn't see, but are actually very important for sustaining and even growing Caribbean rum into the premium sector that it is morphing into today.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, final question here. What are some areas that you think are particularly important for WIRSPA and its members to focus on in the near to medium term future?
Yeah, one of the things that when I became chairman, that I worked with the CEO, with Vaughn, was that while the national organization is a member of WIRSPA, and so they attend the meeting and they give them correspondence, that we reached out to our constituent members, the individual distilleries in countries where there are multiple distilleries. And so we had moved our board meeting around, and we had actually had one-to-one meeting with all the distillers in Dominican Republic, in Jamaica, in Barbados, and so on, so that every player in the industry feel they're part of the industry and feel that WIRSPA is looking after their interests. And so that sort of alignment in the industry is important, because it also allows us to be able to speak with one voice. Right? I also think one of the main things that I believe we should keep focusing on is that even though we are individual distillers and individual brands, the fact is that the origin, the Caribbean as the origin of rum, to me is a very important that we maintain the integrity and we speak with one voice, because the marketplace is very huge, very complex. If we take our total rum sold in the global marketplace, is a very small percentage, So we're a small voice in a whole huge market. And I think that as Caribbean producers, we need to work together to present the Caribbean as an origin of real premium rum. We have a long history. Each territory has their own unique way of doing it, but as a region that is famous, that has a long history of rum that goes back, centuries, I think it is important that we preserve that platform and use it to build the products that we produce in the Caribbean.
I absolutely agree. So we have a couple questions here. First one is from Christina Wolf in Germany. She says, what has changed for WIRSPA on the market in recent years since 2009? I met you then in London, and you were talking to me about this topic.
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
She says, what has changed for WIRSPA? She said on the market, as maybe meant in the market. What has changed for WIRSPA in recent years since 2009?
WIRSPA as a trade organization, things have changed internally, the way we do things, but it has also changed on the way since 2009 to now, we've had the program of the Authentic Caribbean Rum Mark. Since that program came to an end, we're not engaged so much in the joint marketing, because we don't have the funding for that. But I think there's a lot of WIRSPA the Secretariat has been able to put together a lot of technical training material, and it's engaging the distillers. So I think our staff at all levels have been benefit from some of the technical inputs that WIRSPA has been bringing to each member. And so I think as an industry, we are better equipped, and our staff are better trained and have a better insight, and we have relationships with various organizations, and we continue to build on those relationships. So WIRSPA as a trade organization can only do so much, and we have to respond as circumstances and as the environment in which we do business change, and I think that is what we've been doing.
Okay.
A lot more education to our members.
Another question from Christina, and by the way, if anybody has other questions, get them in there now before we wrap up. I'm reading Christina's question, and I think what she's asking is, she says, I know they are niche products for you, but are you planning to launch more distillery type ones? So like I'm imagining like the single stills or whatever. Are more of those coming, you think?
Yeah, I think we will continue to innovate, and find new expressions. A few years ago, we did a range of rums aged in different style barrels, for example.
Right.
So people can see the impact of different barrels on the same spirit. We started out with a portfolio of rum that was the blends of different still. We now start putting out single still rum out there. We are also putting out rum at barrel strength versus, the 40%. So within the range of different styles of rums we have, within the different aging processes, different barrels that are being used, we will continue to put out different expressions, as we go along that road. And there's going to continue to be a lot of innovation, I think, by all rum producers in the region.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's great. I think I'm not going to give away anything too much, but I do know there's some interesting single or cast strength versions coming from El Dorado, and it's sort of good to see even cast strength from the other distilleries. It works by member distilleries who are sort of realizing that there's a premium market out there. There are people who will buy special limited edition releases and pay good money for them. And I think this is all an important part of Caribbean rum sort of coming into its own, and in large part, in some ways, started by you in El Dorado in 1992.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to demonstrate the versatility of rum. Mm-hmm. Historically, 30, 40, 50 years ago, rum was that thing that you had to add a lot of coke to so as to make it palatable. We want to demonstrate the versatility of rum and the versatility of the stills that each one of our distillers have, and the aging process and the conditions under which that aging process takes place. So I think you're going to continue to see a lot of innovation as we go down the road.
I, for one, am very excited by that. So Komal, a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you again for doing this. I think we certainly covered a lot of ground. Anything else you want to add before we have Will take us out?
No, I think it was a pleasure to be here and chat with you. I think that the rum industry is at a very important and an interesting point. As you know, certainly we have been able to get the Demerara GI, I know, across the region. There are others who are doing it. So I think these are developments that will help to enhance, the standing of Caribbean rums. And consumers around the world will have an interesting range of products from which to make their choice.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. I think the continued rise of Caribbean rum is in large part dependent upon friendly competition, cooperation amongst each other. So thank you again. Will, take us out.
Yeah, just want to echo what Matt said. Thank you, Komal, for taking the time to do this and share your knowledge and experience with everyone. Had a lot of great comments coming in, people who are really thankful that you took the time to do this. So appreciate it, as always, to both of you. And I also want to let everyone know, we put a little link up underneath the stream right now that you can click to go ahead and register for the next WIRSPA Icon Series session. Matt, do you want to share anything about that one, or?
We will be chatting next week with Joy Spence, the master blender for J. Ray and Nephew. I had the pleasure of doing our little pre-interview a couple of days ago, and I think we've got some really interesting topics that I think people are going to really enjoy.
Excellent. Well, I know we're all looking forward to that. So thank you again, Komal, and everyone else. We will see you next time.
All right. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you. All the best. Thanks. Bye for now.